Hello, good evening. Hello, good evening, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Two Fat Lardies Oddcast. And we've got a fantastic show this evening. And here I am again, joined by the yin and yang of miniature wargaming, Richard Clark and Nick Skinner. Guys, gentlemen, welcome back to the Oddcast.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Sydney.
That was perfectly in tune together, almost like yin and yang. That couldn't have been scripted to any better effect. Are you both well? You're both looking very well.
Sid, that just proves that we're not ventriloquist dummies, because ventriloquist dummies can never speak at the same time.
True. No, I'm terribly ill. I've got man flu and I'm crying a lot. So, but other than that, I'm great. It's nice to be here. This has cheered me up a bit, along with the 3 cups of coffee I've had to try and give me a caffeine rush to get me through the event. But yeah.
Well, you're both looking well, but considerably well, bearing in mind the month that all 3 of us have had. And we're not going to grumble about work here, but we are going to mention our quite considerable travels over the last 30 days or so, starting with Hearts of Lard, which was held in March, the second Hearts of Lard, which was a splendid event. Richard, I know you were there, and Nick also, you were there, and we enjoyed evening hospitality as well in Rickmansworth, which is in Hertfordshire, England. But maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, great event.
Hertfordshire, England.
Hertfordshire, England. Run by Joe Bilton. Really good day at Rickmansworth School, which is we're in the main hall there. So loads of room, loads of tables, loads of chairs. So a really good facility. Then we went along to a smashing little pub in the evening, which was great fun. Really enjoyed it. Really had a good time. I had In the Buff on the table, which was slightly chaotic, very much a play test game, and that there's no better way to test a game than to put it in front of people. And it went careering off the rails. In the first game was great and it all looked great, and the second game went careering off the rails, and that's involved a major rewrite. So a couple of people said, "Oh, can I have a copy?" And I said, "Yeah, but I'm having to do a bit of a rewrite before I send it out to you. But I'm going to get that done before I go to Historicon, because my old chum John Davenport's painting up some figures for In the Buff, and we're going to try and run that out there as a bit of an impromptu jam session, if you like." But yeah, Rick,
it was good. I enjoyed it.
Right. Hearts of Lard, really good.
I wasn't due to be there. I was a last minute stand-in. We'd had a commitment as my daughter's. These things, I've got many kids. Well, I've got 3, but their birthdays always seem to clash with Lardy events. And we had plans that meant I wasn't going to be able to go to Hearts of Lard, but those plans were rearranged. Joe had a dropout, so I stepped in and did a table. So I ran a table of Chain of Command. Kind of the one that wasn't really prepared until about 2 days beforehand. I just I opened the cupboard and thought, what can I reach? And the first box I pulled out was British Recce, and the other box was American Transport, and it put me in mind of a scenario from the Market Garden campaign, where a group of American Jeeps travel north along Hell's Highway, and they get to St. Erden Road, and they take the wrong road out of town. They turn left, and they go due north into the German positions, and have a kind of mad episode of hell driving as they realize they've gone the wrong way, drive into the town centre, turn around and come back out again, and meet their compatriots coming the other way. But I amended it slightly. So we had American Jeeps coming on from one side of the table. In the middle of the table were the Germans, and coming up from the other side of the table was a small British recce force. So the Germans found themselves fighting. There's a very bizarre and very rapidly developing fight, as the Jeeps whizzed on from the north and the armored cars whizzed on from the south, with the Jeeps attempting to break through to the south and the armored cars and recce just trying to probe northward. So it was a really interesting and ill-prepared, and I know it sounds confusing, scenario, but it was actually quite good fun. We had some really different games with it. And again, some different faces as well. Always different, always nice to meet different people and introduce the game to them. And we had, it was a good laugh. We enjoyed it a lot. It was tiring. I'm finding it so tiring at the moment to run games. It's physically exhausting, isn't it? All these commitments we make. Maybe I should eat fewer cakes.
Well, I thought it looked great. I thought both of your games looked great. It is interesting about the sort of physical demands of running a game. You don't really think that it would be difficult and challenging sitting down and running a game for 2 or 3 hours. It's interesting that there were a lot of
Sitting
photos.
down, did you say, Sid?
Yeah.
Well, I sit down, but it's a
That's
smaller
okay.
table.
That's the first thing I'm getting wrong. Let me write that down.
Yeah.
Sit down next time.
Well, that's the difference. We stand up, he sits down. That's a comment, right?
Yeah, but he has his arms up in the air.
Oh yeah,
Going,
bonsai
bunkers.
bunkers.
Well, I did indeed run When the Last Sword is Drawn, which is incorrectly titled by you both as being Bonsai Bonkers for some reason, which I've never quite fathomed. And that was good fun. We had 2 great games of that with the new winter terrain, which I tried to create some height advantages on it. And I was using archery rules for the first time in public. So that was a lot of fun, really. But I think one of the things I did notice, just looking at some of the videos and photos people were showing around the internet after the day, was a lot of people were sitting down. So, and I think there's a very much overlooked point in having lots of chairs about in any sort of games day. And there were lots in the school, obviously. There weren't as many at Salute, which is one of the events that we'll come to in a few moments. But before that, we need to have a big shout out to an event I didn't go to, but you both did, which was Clog Lard in the wonderful Netherlands. Richard, tell me all about that, and Nick as well, please.
You go first, Nick. You've
Cloglard. Again, well, Cloglard was one that I first of all was, then wasn't, then was, then wasn't, and ended up getting there for half of the event. But it was amazing. Brilliant location, blowed anybody's socks off who was there, because the location is a small community hall. This is the first ever Cloglard that the guys have put together. Jasper and Yer and Altio and Arjan and all the others who deserve a fantastic shout out for the hard work they did. The event was in a small community hall right next door to the Urquhart Loft House in Arnhem, literally right next door to it, which was a stunning location. And it meant that, you know, if you walked up to the event from the town centre, as we did in the morning, Rich, we bumped into each other. I was walking along the road, nice and peaceful. All of a sudden, I could hear Richard's voice 475 yards behind me, because I'm attuned to pick it up at such distances. And you're walking up the road along the Utrechtseweg that the British Airborne are trying to push into. So I was walking up there with my phone, with my kind of then and now photos, you know, lined up, and just enjoying what turned out to be a battlefield tour before the event. So, and then the event itself was great. I played a game of Strength and Honor, which is a game that I've not played since it's been published, and I really, really enjoyed it. Shout out to Julian and the other guys that I was playing with, and to Yer, who did a very good job at talking us through it. And the event was great. The tables were fantastic. There was free coffee. Lard coffee was free for the day. It was really well attended as well. It was good quality games, good quality people. And I think after I left, Rich, things got even better.
We had cat food. It was it was amazing. We went to a cat food restaurant, and I think I had I can't remember the different brands of cat food now, but we had a whole range of like a cat food buffet. So it was quite remarkable. Yeah, had I been a cat, I would have been in my element. So that was.
So is it Kitty Cat Lard?
It was like
next time.
Yeah, it was. It was brilliant. You know, you had some of those pouches full of very moist cat food, some dried cat food. It was like a cat food buffet, and it was irrespective of the cat food. What was brilliant was everybody. We had a whole international range of gamers there. I got to sit with some German guys, and we had a really good time, having a great laugh. Well, I did anyway. Yeah, so it was really nice to meet some people who you've known, as always, who you've known on the internet but never met. And it was a really jolly, sociable experience. Yeah, so it's the first Cloglard. They've got a clever Dutch name for it, but nobody understands that. It's something to do with lard, funnily enough, but in Dutch.
Roitzel is the Dutch for lard. I know that much.
Blah blah blah. That's right.
Yeah.
Which is great if you're Dutch. But I'm not. But absolutely brilliant venue. Some great games. I got to play I'm Your Chop Mum with Phil and Jenny, which was fabulous. And I got to play a game of Chain of Command, run by Nick from Bavaria, who we first met when we went to Arnhem. Monteroy, isn't it? I think his name on Twitter.
Yeah.
Fabulous painter. So the armies that he had on the table were just stunning. So that was it. And he'd made the game was set on Ginkle Heath, and he'd made this heathland with lots of clumps of heather. It looked amazing. It was museum standard, I think is the only way. So my big thanks to him and to Phil and Jenny for putting on two tremendously eye-catching games. And I have to give a shout out for Jasper, the chief editor at Caravanserai, for a game that he put on with a hand-built building and a gasworks, and it just looked amazing. I mean, I was blown away by the quality of all the games there. And of course, what goes without saying is how fabulously hospitable our Dutch hosts were. And we were joined by Patrick and John from Lard America, who'd flown over just for a few days. Great to see them. And so brilliant time, really brilliant time all round.
The table that Jasper put on there was the Denenord. He'd built the Denenord, which is in the southwest perimeter of the Oosterbeek pocket. Right. Built from scratch. And I think it's highly likely you're going to see that table back at the museum in October for the game there. And I don't know whether Nick's game will be there or not, but I thought actually the Dutch SS on Ginkle Heath would be a really interesting game to take to the museum. Quite controversial, maybe, but maybe it's an interesting one to provoke some conversation. I don't know whether that'd be a good idea or a bad one, but quite interesting when we were there. Actually, I took some time in the afternoon to go to the museum, the City Museum, which is actually on that Utrechtse to a rather fascinating exhibition of Third Reich art, which was really very interesting about the way the Nazis had used their, they'd use their cultural sway, I guess, on these artists to produce some wonderful pieces of work in terms of the art that actually underlined their rather interesting mindset of the time. But, how the art now coming out for demonstration, for exhibition again. Quite interesting, very popular, lots of people there intrigued by it. A very interesting exhibition. So it's good to see that parts of history that were previously kind of shut away and not discussed are kind of out for discussion again. Previously council cultured and now demonstrated, exhibited and open for discussion. You'd be a big fan of that, Sid. Not Nazi art, but of the open conversations that go around it. Let me make that clear, folks.
Yes.
Very much so. Very much so. And you and me had a chat about that, didn't we? Over breakfast on the way to another show, which I mentioned briefly already, which was Salute in East London's Dockland only a couple of weeks ago. And that was obviously a really big war games show, the complete opposite of the intimate surroundings of a Lard Games Day. But I think we had a good time there. We had a good look around the show. We helped you out on the trade stand. Richard managed to turn a few pounds into the beret, which you and Emma had on the table while you swanned off round to see your adoring fans. And I think you actually did a speech or some form of presentation. And I just realised now I haven't actually asked you how that went down.
I have no idea. I was asked to be on a panel and talk about history in wargaming, and I couldn't hear what anybody was saying, and I don't think anybody could hear what I was saying. So I'm not sure how it went down at all. It's an incredibly noisy venue, and putting up a few sheets to sort of screen off this area doesn't quite cut it. So in the respect of making sure you're being heard. and there were a couple of guys on the panel who were from Italy, and I'm not sure I would have entirely understood them in a library, let alone in a noisy hall. So it was I don't know what the word is. It was interesting.
I think that's as good a word as any we can find. And Nick, you and me went round the various games, didn't we? It's a real mix of games, some absolutely fantastic games, and some smaller games. There's a lot of smaller games on the 2 foot by 2 foot footprint type board stroke table. Funny, I might have seen that one before, but I think we did see some really nice games. There's a fantastic medieval galley game there, a really good Viking estuary longships landing game. There was Ken's game of Jutland, which looked wonderful. I know we spent a bit of time there, but it was just really nice, I think, in the main, catching up with people, which is one of those things that the big war game shows are still really good at.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a day of impressive tables, Sid. One of the most impressive was the one we had at breakfast. With a lovely sourdough and poached eggs. With some avocado out there for the hello black pudding fans. Yeah, we enjoyed some avocado pre-salute, and the tables at the show. I was impressed by the tables that I saw. I just thought there could have been more of them. It seemed to be whether there were fewer people or more empty space. I don't really know, but I kind of got the feeling that there could have been more games on. I thought the guys who worked in the large zone did a bloody brilliant job. Joe Bilton and Mark and the housewife's favourite, of course, absolutely. Dave Brown with his Grand General Dame too. They did a fantastic game all day, and it's so punishing. I know, to run a game at Salute and to keep the that energy level going for so long. Rich, what do you want to say, mate?
I'm just going to say that there's a health and safety issue at Salute where they have to have like 10 meters between different aisles, and that does tend to give a feel of sort of isolation. Each game feels like it's in a bit of a bubble and isolated from anything else around it because of the health and safety spacing rules. And it's interesting because I never find any other shows where they have 10-meter spacing rules, but there we are. That's fine. That's the way.
Well, also, I've been to many trade shows at Excel in the same space, and they seem a lot more crowded. Whether that's just the way that space is used for what's the word? You have your kind of your area where your business sets up. Whether wargaming businesses are slightly different in the way they use that space or not, I don't know. But yeah, it was great. It was busy. I saw loads of people. I saw lots and lots of fantasy and science fiction. I probably would have liked to see more history. Now I don't, obviously I don't get to see everything, and it's not possible for that to be a balanced view. But my sense was there's always a bit more room for a bit more history games. I think and hope that the traders who were there had a good day. Footfall, there seemed to be people very interested in all the stands that I visited anyway. So I hope they did really well.
Well, I mean, we certainly did well in that respect, and I found it busier than last year. It was interesting because I was listening to Alex from Storm Steel, not off Steel Pickers, on his summary of the show, which he released last night as we record this. And he said, "Oh, it seemed quiet," and he said the large zone seemed quiet, but we'd actually booked 4 tables. But some of the guys there said, "Oh, I'd like a bit more space." So we said, "Okay, what we'll do is we'll break down the 4th table, and you can have more space, and we won't get Sydney to run Bonsai Bonkers." And actually, they didn't use the extra tables, so we could have run a 4th game. But the guys who were there, Joe Bilton running What a Tanker, that had crowds around it all day, as did Strength and Honor, and as did Dave Brown's General Dame game featuring Plants Noir. So it was buzzing, but I think the spacing thing does mean that some of that feeling of buzz evaporates.
I love that, Rich, when you said Dave Brown featuring Plants Noir.
Exactly.
It sounds like fun. Yeah, straight in at number 6.
But yeah, good show. So
Well,
busy time. But I tell you what, it persuaded me. Having done Arnhem and then having done Salute, I got no work done for 2 weeks, literally. So it's what I've said before about I'm going to do less events. I've got to do it because I literally can't have 2 weeks where I'm completely unproductive. So I'm very keen to support as many events as possible, but I'm coming to the point where I have to consider supporting the people who don't go to those events with new products. So I'm actually now having to be sensible. I can't be omnipresent at every event that there is, and that's a shame in a way, because I really enjoy that bit. But on the other hand, I'm finding myself getting really quite frustrated at not producing what I want to produce. Talking of which, can I just say something, because we have got a little bit of news on what's coming through, Sid, and we've James Morris and I are very pleased to say that we've had the first layout sample chapter back of Midgard from the studio who we're working with there, and we're really pleased with the way they've done that and the artwork. So we're now at the point today where I'm passing on the handover file with the whole book to them, and they are going to be using that as a template to lay out the whole book. So Midgard has really taken a leap forward this week. It's always difficult when you're working with a third party, because you tend to lose control of things. But you know, that's the reality. So people saying to me, when's it out? And I've had to say, I'm really not sure, because the third party are the guys who are by default doing this part of the job, and we're having to work with them. So the good news is that's going forward. The Far East Handbook, I've just been taking some photos this morning to go in that. We're finishing that. That will be going to the printers. We've finished the proofreading, the main proofreading. We're just going through a final rerun through, and I've got a meeting with a proofreader tomorrow. But by the end of Tuesday or Wednesday morning, the Far East should be at the printers. So that is really happening, which is great after 4 years in production. And a big shout out to Len down in Australia, who's been having some health issues and has just undergone some surgery. So if you're listening, mate, we're all thinking of you, and hopefully seeing the Far East come to fruition will be a bit of a fillip for you and cheer you up, mate. So best of British luck to you down there. What else did I have to say? Oh, we had a competition. Sydney, were you about to ask me about a competition?
Well, by some strange synchronicity, indeed. But before we move on to that, just say very best of wishes from all of us, I think, Len, and full recovery on the cards, I very much hope. But we will cheer you up by the results, hopefully, of a competition that we've had, which is the General Dame vignette competition. The prizes for which were someone that's prepared paint by our friend Jim Ibbotson, and they really did look absolutely fantastic, didn't they, Richard? They were really, really good. But yeah, you, really, Richard, are going to be announcing the winner.
Winners, mate, winners. In fact, the winners already know they've already received their vignettes. I've been a bit remiss because I've just been so busy trying to get everything done, which is my constant refrain these days. But I'm very pleased to announce that Colin Pearce in Buckinghamshire in the UK won the first prize, and he chose to have the fabulous vignette created by Jim, which was of the French cuirassiers command group, which was superb. And Andrew McCoy in Utah in the United States of America had a lovely second prize with Marshall Ney and his staff gathered round a table looking at the maps, which is amazingly stunning. So quite an international showing there, if if two people can be international. But yeah, so congratulations to them, and very well done indeed. We were over the moon to be able to dish those out. So well done.
And good news as well about Midgard and the Far East Handbook. I know that's going to be very welcome news to a lot of people. That was something that me and Nick got asked a lot about at Salute. So clearly a lot of excitement about that. Well, I think at this point we'll have a short break and make our way down to the workshop. And welcome back. And here we are in the workshop. So there's been a degree of frantic activity from at least two of us in preparing things for various different shows and games days and games at the club. Shall I start off with you, Richard?
You can do, yeah. And mine is a story of abject failure. I've got loads of stuff from Paul. I always said that once the Far East Handbook was produced, I was going to have a bit of a sojourn doing some crazy Gotterdammerung Fall of the Reich stuff. And that's what I intend to do. So I've been looking at getting my Volksgrenadier unit on the table. So I've been buying lots of support options. So I've got Hetzers, I've got 250 drilling, triple mount 20mm cannons. I've got Pack 43s on cruciform mounts. I've got a Panzer 38T Aufklärungs tank,
Nice.
which is super sexy. And Paul has printed all these in 1:50 scale, the preferred scale of lard. And I mean, this is such a sexy little beast. It's an early war 38T with the turret on of a 222 armored car with a 20mm cannon. It's just bonsai bonkers. It's totally mad.
Yeah.
And my Brits, I've been doing kangaroos, sport, and wasps, as in the little flamethrowers,
Nice.
not white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So little flame-throwing tanks, and all sorts of other bits and pieces. But they're all grey with the undercoat, and I haven't got around to painting them yet. I had a conversation on my sick bed with man flu the day before yesterday with a guy in Australia who posted some pictures of some late war stuff he'd been painting, and his camouflage scheme was really nice. I've always used Vallejo Middlestone as my base, but it's a bit yellowy. It looks like yellow. So he recommended Tamiya paints. So I bought some here. I've got his recipe. And so I've got the sort of camouflage olive green. I've got the dark yellow as a base colour. And I've got some other one here that I can't read it because I haven't got my glasses. Red brown. And I bought those. And then I read about how to airbrush them. And I've had to buy some thinners. That's not arriving till tomorrow. But so I'm looking forward to getting painting on them. But I've just got them all stuck together with all the bits of stowage and undercoated. So I really feel I've been a failure. But at the same time, I have been finishing off the Far East Handbook. I have been to Arnhem and I have been to Salute. So it's one of those, you can't do everything and, you know, achieve the whole time. So I don't feel guilty. I don't care. Grabbers,
Still
you've been
quite
doing
impressive.
stuff, haven't you? Because I know, Nick, you've been gallivanting around the world with your missus taking you to La Belle France, Spain, the Netherlands. It's it's almost like je sans frontière for you at the moment, isn't
Yeah.
it?
I am the man of international travel. I've done not a lot because really I haven't been here very much, is the truth of it all. As you say, I've been to Seville, Paris, Arnhem, Amsterdam, well, and a few days in Normandy with some chums, showing them the battlefields. But so,
Peckham,
who?
Peckham.
Beckham. Where did I go? I was in Hackney, which is truly international, I guess, as well as other places. So yeah, not much on that front. I have taken receipt of, well, being international, of course, I've taken receipt of my international Kickstarter, arrived from the US, the 7th Cavalry Plains War range from Brigade Games, which looks absolutely lovely. I spent much more on that than I ever should have done, and my wife would not be taking me anywhere if she knew what I'd spent on that Kickstarter.
Sculpted
They all came through.
by?
Beg your pardon?
Who sculpted that 7th Cavalry?
Was sculpted by the one and only Paul Hicks.
Oh, that's interesting. Right, carry on.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
So I've been looking at those. They've been really great. I realized that actually I've got lots and lots of cavalry and not very many Indians at all. So it's not really it'll not really the Battle of Little Bighorn, more the kind of Sunday night punch up. Yeah, looking forward to getting those on the table at some point in the future. I don't know when that will ever happen, but not much else for me, I'm afraid, this month, Sid.
Still impressive considering you're gallivanting, as Richard would say. Well, I've been busy doing lots of terrain, actually. So having finished the terrain for a winter Japanese mountain scene for Hearts of Lard, I've then rushed on to start doing the verdant forest equivalent, because lots of Japanese mountain villages and mountain forests are irresistible, and they're often surrounded by lush forests and various different sort of trees. So I'm doing a board of that. Hopefully that might see the gaming table at Operation Market Larden at the end of May. But that's been a lot of fun to do. Been taking a lot of tips from well-known terrain makers like Joe and John around the interwebs on the best sort of looking trees and how to do them in this sort of way that they're pretty robust to be taking up and down the country on various gaming shows. But that's been a lot of fun. And I've also been trying to work out a way in which I can kind of embed a stream, a mountain stream, in one of the boards. The boards don't really themselves lend themselves to a river, that would be too large, but been trying to figure out how to get a stream into the action. I thought that might be something which is quite entertaining. And I've also purchased some Steel Fist miniatures. They've got a very nice samurai range that somebody recommended at Salute. So Simon Chick, I think, very kindly sent me some of those over. I did pay for them, I should add, but he still sent them over, and they look really nice. So I'm going to try and get them painted up as well for a slightly earlier period than the Edo period. So that's round about the sort of late. The figures are really for the 16th century as opposed to the 17th century, but there's a bit of variety there. So that's been good, doing a lot of reading, but now is not the time to delve into the library. And I think that's kind of it for the workshop, because we have various other things to get on with in the show. So we're not going to have a best bit on the bench this edition of the Oddcast. We're going to hold our best bits over because we've got a very, very special best bit, or indeed best person on the bench. A very unique section of the show, because we're about to be joined by, if I may say so, one of the sexiest figures in wargames sculpting on the planet. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to welcome onto the Oddcast Mr. Paul Hicks. Mr. Paul Hicks, ladies and gentlemen. Paul, it's a great pleasure for all of us to welcome you to the Oddcast. How are you feeling today?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. It's Monday. It's my favourite day of the week, actually, because I get to come into the sheds, and everyone else has either gone to school or gone to work. So I'm back where I like to be.
Fantastic. Well, looking good. So what we're going to do, first of all, first question, it's not from anyone from far parts of the world, but it's from Nick, really, is how do you get from that piece of green stuff or grey stuff or whatever you've produced as a putty, if indeed it is a putty, what do you do to get from that into the wonderful figures that you've created for all of us?
Hold on a minute. Before we do that, before we talk about, I'm more interested in the big picture. How is it that you go from deciding on a range of figures? How do you then decide what's going to be in that range of figures? And how do you then research how you're going to do it before you even pick up a tiny piece of green stuff or grey stuff or purple stuff or whatever crazy stuff you use? So what's the big decisions to be made before you begin?
Hang on a minute. We should go even further back than that.
No.
Because I can't even, I dare say this, but there might be people out there who don't know who Paul is.
Oh, don't be ridiculous. That's like saying you don't know who Father Christmas is. He's even got the same beard.
He's the world's finest figure sculptor, ladies and gentlemen. And if you don't know Paul, then you don't know figures. So, yes. And then Rich, I think you're absolutely right. How do you go from nothing to everything?
Can we talk Arnhem? I know you're kind of at the end of Arnhem and probably thinking, I'm talking about the Arnhem range. I'm talking about the Arnhem range. So, because we know that intimately, because we all backed your Kickstarter, we've all got boxes and boxes on. How did that range come about at the what was the moment when it was conceived?
Well, I'd had a bit of success with Kickstarters before with the Baron's War range.
Yeah.
And myself and Paul at Empress had decided that we fancy doing one for ourselves, because it is a combination of a collaboration between me and Empress.
Yeah.
That's why they're not on general release. And then we were thinking, oh, what could we do? Because we wanted something it's kind of out there, but would lend itself to a lot of character. And then we thought Soviets, and we thought that would be great. And then Putin invaded Ukraine, so we thought that's probably not the best thing to do at this present moment. So then we were looking around, and I have quite a lot of interest in, sort of Commonwealth forces of the Second World War, and one army I fancied doing over and over again would be British paratroopers. I know I did it years ago when I owned Old Action Miniatures, but this, I thought I could really have a go at it again, and we came up with the idea of what would they look like about 3 or 4 days, because everyone seems to do them fresh off of the landing zones. And we thought, yeah, that would be good, and that would be a good starting point. So that's where the nucleus of the idea came from. But you're also governed by how many figures you get on a mold. So, there's 16 figures you can get on a mold. That's why they're generally in packs of 4. And then what you do is from that you work out that you're going to need X amount of riflemen, which is generally sort of 2 packs of riflemen or 2 packs of stand and a command. So you start to work in sets of 16 figures. So it's normally you start off with 4 packs of 4, because that's what you can get on a master mold. And then from then we're basically we work backwards from there, and then the research, obviously there's quite a lot of paratrooper research, but then with the Second World War range we can have a look at some period first-hand photographs, which there's plenty at Arnhem, and go, right, these, I'm going to come forward a bit. So the poses are dictated to some extent by the mold process. So that's why a lot of the weapons are close to the body, because you can't have them jutting out at odd angles, because they won't be able to be molded. So you've kind of planned those into your range, and then from there we sort of go to pictures and then pick out the look, the uniforms that we want to sort of replicate, and then start that's where we work from.
So Paul, can I ask you then, you said about the poses are dictated by the molding process. Is that just something you've learned over time about how far it needs to be, what can you get away with, what can't you get away with? You get into a rhythm of it. Basically you can then, luckily, sort of 17th century right through to 19th century drill pretty much lends itself amazingly well to being molded as toy soldiers. Because the majority of the figures are flat forward facing for marching, or side facing for firing. So that's not a problem. It's becomes a bit more tricky later on. So you do now, I mean, you can definitely see it in like the Perry's work, where they've got it bang on. They know the restrictions of the process, and then they can pose a figure really, really well and natural around the limitations of molding. So just as an example then, what kind of pose could you not do?
So running, so the molds are only a certain depth.
Yeah.
So for starting, you can't really have a figure running forwards with his a pole or a musket or a weapon sort of across him and pointing at an extreme left and right, because that weapon, the musket, or if it's got a bayonet, will stick too far up into the mold. You won't get a decent flow into it. So it's all about the flow of the metal into the mold. So you want everything to sort of flow out from a central point. The other thing is having big gaps within a figure, so you don't generally have elbows out too far, because then you create a void within the pose, and because it's two pieces of rubber coming together, that will really affect the you'll get the mold will then start tearing, and then you'll get masses of material left in those spaces. So that's generally why you don't see rifle slings and too much hanging down, because they then start to become miscast, or molds will tear around them, and then you'll get pieces of material that shouldn't be there.
So you've got your idea for the range, and you've got your two rifle packs, you've got your Sten packs, you've got your Bren pack and your command pack, or whatever that might be. So then you say, well, I'm going to create these from nothing. So you've got the Arnhem pictures, and you know what you're going to do, and you've got your, I don't know what you want to talk about, Stens or Brens or command or whatever. What do you then do? Where do you start? Because I see these kind of things that look like paper clips distorted out of shape. You know, this is I'm going down to the base level, because I don't understand any of this stuff. It was why you're here talking about it, not us.
Yeah.
How do you start then?
Well, some people start with a wire armature, basically a stick man.
Yeah.
And I bought some what they're called by eBob, called eBob puppets, and so they're stick men already made, and we've come to an agreement with eBob, so I can order them direct. But it just cuts out the having to make a little wire armature into a stick man and then pose. So I have these little metal, if you just drew a stick man, that's what they would look like. And then from there, I would make a pose. I actually have a little oven on my desk that I put them in, just to warm them up, so that they're a bit more malleable. Put them into a pose, and then stick them to a base, and that's where I would start.
That's the stick. That's the stick man figure, is it?
Yeah, that's the stick man figure.
So the stick's what, about the thickness of a paperclip type thing, is it, or
just slightly thicker?
Right.
It's got a little bit of musculature on there, just to sort of as a guide.
Yeah.
And then I would pose that. I would generally do 4 at a time, so I would work on a pack of figures at a time.
Right.
Now there's 2 ways I would do this. So for the Arnhem stuff, I made them up individually. So I would make the individual figures. So but if I was doing something like Napoleonics, I would do what we call a dolly, where I would do a pose, like a suite of poses, but without any arms and heads, but put all of the equipment onto them.
Right.
So that those would then go off to be molded.
Right.
And then I would add, because if you're doing 4 figures marching in step, there's no point doing those individually.
Right. Yeah. So actually, you can find yourself casting halfway through the process just to get a standard.
I would be cut. Well, the problem is I do this so many times, you forget the processes. So now you're reminding me of what I normally do. So yes, we would decide on the poses, but before that, we would have all of the weapons made, and we generally get those done by Ian Armstrong. Those will be, the rifles would be made. Then I would make all of your backpacks and anything that's going to be reproduced on the figure every time. I'll do it once and then make sure it's as good as I can get it.
Yeah.
Then I don't have to do it time and time again.
Yeah.
Those will all be cast up, and I'll have bags of those ready to go. And then we go to posing them up. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. So it makes absolute sense. So things you've got to do more than once, you just do it once.
Do it once.
Make a load of them. So I'm guessing
Yeah.
that somewhere in your shed there, you've got a bag of bits, which basically means that you've got, British water bottles and rucksacks and stuff like that.
Well,
Like,
this will be no use to your listeners, but that is literally bags of
Right.
bits.
Yeah. We're not worried
And
about
each
that,
one-
mate. This is all for our benefit.
No, we've got to talk about all those outrageously. Oh, how can you have those photos on the wall, Paul?
Of me.
Yeah.
Me and you guys together that one weekend. Yeah. No.
So
Okay,
that's-
right. So if you want a Bren gun, if you're doing a whole force for Arnhem, you're probably going to get the Bren gun made once, and then you can get that cast, and then use that. So it's actually quite a complicated process. There's going to be time involved here. We've got to get the weapons together. We've got to get the kit bags together. We've got to get the webbing pouches together. We've got to get the water bottles together, and they all go away. And then presumably what? You go on the piss for several days while you've got nothing else to do.
Yeah. Well, everything's done in stages. So while I'm waiting for that, then I can start making either dollies or but Griffin molds are so quick at turning stuff around. It doesn't take too long. And then in the meantime, I'm probably working on someone else's figures at the same time, so I can factor that in.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because then I would be off.
So it makes absolute sense. I mean, in terms of the quality, I kind of hesitate to ask this, Paul, because I'm quite scared of the answer. What scale are your figures then? What scale are the Arnhem figures? Is it, we talk about 156, 148, 150 being a perfect match. Because obviously, if you've got a Bren gun, it's done to a certain scale and it goes really nicely with the figures. And I see other figure ranges where the Bren gun is as big as is a lot bigger than you might expect it to look. So am I allowed to ask this question? What scale are they?
1/50th, I think the vehicles are. Yeah. So
yes!
It's
yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we found.
Right, that's it. You don't need to say any more. Interview's over. No, right. Right, that's good. Excellent.
But it's interesting though, isn't it? Because presumably though, Paul, that is dictated to some degree by that armature thing that you get. So that's kind of set to that scale because you bulk it up. And you bulk it up to I'd say your figures are realistically proportioned, and we have, you have other figure ranges that are quite heroically done, aren't they? Would a heroic figure be built on the same size armature, or would they use a different armature size? Do you know that?
It will be up to the sculptor, to be honest.
Right. Yeah.
They would have in mind. Well, I can only say in the way I sculpt, but I should think they have a size that they work from, and they keep those armatures in a certain, sort of tolerance of 28 mil, and that's how they would work. That I mean, for me, using these the armatures I use, that just means it's consistent across the board. As we know, all humans aren't the same size, but generally I like to use those because it keeps everything in a uniform height tolerance.
All the important ones are.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, right? Okay. Good. And what tools are you using, mate? When you're doing the sculpting, and what is it? Green stuff, or I know there's all different stuffs. But...
Yeah, I use a putty, and horrifically, I've just found. Well, we've kind of over the last month or so found out we think it's no longer produced. So I managed to buy a load of it in bulk, but it's called Procreate, and it's a bit like green stuff, but it's grey. So even if we call the originals greens, because the original, stuff that Perry's make is normally in a green, looks green. The ones I make are in grey. It's exactly the same sort of idea as green stuff. It's a 2-part. You mix it up.
You do,
and
right.
then and then you build up the figure in layers, as opposed to sort of carving. I'm sure most of your listeners sort of kind of know it's a building up process as opposed to whittling away.
And when it comes to heads and faces, Paul, is that would you have a bag full of heads? Is a head something that you've got as standard, or do you mold each head face?
Wherever possible, I'll make the faces individually because that's the bit I enjoy the most. So I would, like when we're saying about making dollies where they have no heads and arms. So if you're doing a set of marching British infantry, like Napoleonic British infantry, you can then slightly tilt the face, move it slightly, give it a different expression, make them look different as well.
Interesting, because when I paint figures, I always paint the face last, because for me, the face brings it to life, and that's the figure finished. Because I painted all the rest of it; they're just clothes. When I paint the face, he's come to life, or she, of course.
Which generally I'll sculpt I'll do the uniform. Just the basics of uniform, then stick on all of the equipment I need to stick on, and then it will be the face, because then that will slightly dictate, especially with the Arnhem figures, sort of the motion of the weapon. So you can sort of definitely tie up the arm position with the face, and then they really start to come alive. Then for me, that's where you start to give your figure a personality. Because sometimes when you use, I will use faces that I've made before, because I've got bags of the old figures, because after they've been molded, they come back to you in bits. So when they prize them out of the mold. And I will then, from there, you can use the odd head that you like, but I generally enjoy, because that, again, like you said, painting the face last, for me, it sort of making the head is sort of midway in the process, brings the figure to life, gives it a bit of personality, and hopefully that comes through in the final product.
Definitely. Definitely, that's one of the things that, looking at the Arnhem range that you did, those figures are packed with character. I always find there's two things that make a good figure to me. One is the pose. Whilst it's static, it has to look like it's alive and animated. And the other is the face. The face has to look like a real person and somebody you can imagine in that situation. I'm not really bothered what the water bottle looks like. It's it's not overly important, but it's that sense of flow and animation that I think I really like about your work. That you get the figure that they're alive.
Well, that comes from when I started Bolt Action Miniatures back in 2004 with mate Simon Bargery. He read Mr. Tamier's book, his autobiography, and they were talking about designing figures. And he said that what they would do is that they would look for a pose that was not at the beginning, not at the end, but in between a movement. And that would express more of a flow and some sort of more movement than if you started a figure just standing. You've got some story in there already. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's it lets the mind do the rest of the work. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. You can add in the beginning and the ends, and you've got the meat in the middle to work from.
Okay, but what tools do you use for sculpting?
Well, I've got like I don't know what it's sort of like a
pointy
blade.
thing.
Well, sorry, a pointy thing. Looks like something you would have from the dentist.
Yeah.
Which I picked up at the Crisis show about 20 years ago. Because I had something similar that Games Workshop made.
Yeah.
And this has never been sharpened. Never. And that I would use that to apply, sort of make finer impressions on the figure. It's got slightly curved at both points, both sides.
It looks. I mean, speaking roughly, it looks like the head of an assegai in a time. Oh, it's a bit more of a scimitar in its curve.
It is, yes. Yeah, you're right, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
So I use that, and then I have what's called a clay shaper, which is a silicone. You hear them called silicone tools.
So that is really that's basically a paintbrush handle, but with a little bit of rubber at the end that allows you to push the green stuff or grey stuff around.
Yeah,
I presume.
Yeah. So you can sort of use it to pull or push. I mean, it's all sort of muscle memory now. I know where to push, where to pull to get certain kinds of folds or get the putty to adhere to the previous layer. And then my other tool is an old clay shaper, paintbrush type thing with a pin in.
Okay.
And I'll use that. Yeah. And I'll use that for like corners of eyes or mouths.
Right.
Or just neatening sculpts up by just using it as to roll the putty up. And that's it. Just those three things, really.
Right. Now I need a tip from you here, because I do quite a bit of figure conversions, and I will cut an arm off, and I will drill in a paper clip, and so the top half of the arm will just be a paper clip, right? Now I'm quite good then of applying, and the bottom half of the arm will be from another figure. I do this a lot with plastic figures, especially. Because plastic's really easy for drilling out. And then I'm quite good at filling up that gap with green stuff to make it look like an arm, and I don't have with that. The thing I can't do, I can't put straps on. I can't make belt straps, because when I put them on, they look like it's a python that has been run over by a steamroller wrapped round his waist, as opposed to a neat, crisp piece of webbing belt or whatever. How do you do belts? Or straps?
Belts
or
straps and belts. Yeah, pretty much the same thing. I would get a roll out a thin piece of putty into a little putty worm.
Yeah.
And then just flatten it out with a steel ruler.
Right.
And then you've got your strap. What I will then do is, so if you've got a belt, I would just cut a length of it to do the front and a length of it to do the back.
Yeah.
And then use the tool to make the join, but just as an indent on the sides of the figure, so that it looks like it's gathered, as opposed to wrapping it all the way round. Yeah. So the same with the strap on the shoulder. I would start maybe just where the your collarbone is.
Yeah.
And then lay it across to where the hip is, and then merge it with the putty that's on at the shoulder.
Because often you'll have an epaulette there, won't you? I guess.
So
you're working off the epaulette.
Yeah, but you want the bit on the shoulder or on the hips on the sides to be as close to the dolly or the armature as possible to give that sense of it being gathered in.
Yeah. Okay, that's a top.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? Because I've done that in the past when I've had a bit of green stuff, or perhaps I might have taken a rucksack that was cast on and sort of cut it off, and then wanted to replace the strap underneath it.
Yeah.
But what I've often done is just put the green stuff over it, and then just use a Stanley knife to kind of mark, the tramways, the strap might be. But of course, you then got to kind of push the material of the top. So it kind of looks like that. So what you're saying is I might be better off just applying a small strap over the top of the kind of the
but not over the top. You just
also.
you do
Not
one
over the
strap at the
top.
front and one at the back, because
Yeah.
doing it over the top
yeah,
will look
but I mean,
like he's got a hose pipe wrapped around him.
Yeah, but you say I might be better off having a tiny little strip that I lay on as an additional piece rather than trying to mold it out of what's there already.
Yeah, I mean, those tram lines will give you will push a little bit of material either side.
Yeah.
So it will actually look like it's, you've got a bulge of material, actual uniform that side, and then you layering a thin piece over the top will then give it sort of extra definition.
Good tip.
So on another sort of question, following up from Richard, what about buttons? They've really defeated me in the past. How do you get those little buttons sort of shape, but where the buttons should be?
Is this your latest pantomime role, Sid? Are you playing buttons somewhere?
I have secretly commissioned Paul to make a small miniature of myself. Yeah.
Are these the buttons that go on the back of the trapdoor on your long john pants, Sid? Is it two of those?
Location to be revealed later. Enough of that. Paul, how do you do buttons, mate?
I very, very minute rolls of little balls of putty, and then squashed in when the front of the tunic or the pocket is wet, so that it sort of just sits in.
Gosh, they're tiny then, aren't they? Really tiny. I mean,
hence why I have this optivisor that I'm wearing at the moment.
Yeah. So you've got some magnifying glasses are stuck to your head that are the kind of thing a welder might wear, but presumably make everything look big. So take them off before you go to the toilet would be my advice.
But I used to use, when I first started, a mechanical pencil, and then the end of that, if you push that into the putty, you would get a a button, and then push the edges of the putty around to make it look less like someone has stamped something in. But now you can get very fine like glue applicators from like Hobbycraft. And then what I've done with those is sharp, and it's got a file, and thinned out the edge of them, and you can use those to make tiny shapes and use those to make buttons as well.
So here's a question for you. What's the favourite range that you've ever sculpted? What range have you liked the most? It's a tough question. It's a bit like saying, which of your children do you want to leave all your...
That's easy. I've only got one child. So...
Oh, well, that makes it easy, doesn't it?
Yeah. I don't really know. I enjoy them all.
Yeah.
I think. Once I get into them, I don't enjoy them when I start them. The first week of starting a new range, I really don't like, because I do so many different types of figure, time periods to finish one and then go into the next one.
It's a bit like climbing Everest. It looks worse when you're at the bottom than when you're halfway up, I guess.
Yeah, and kind of not knowing how to climb, because you're So the first few figures that I make will probably get thrown in the bin, because I'm not into the rhythm of it. But by, you know, sort of maybe 10 figures in, I'm into the rhythm of it and know exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Is there a period that you've not sculpted?
I don't really fancy ancients. That doesn't really excite me.
Right.
Not really interested in ancients. And modern stuff, but it all looks the same to me. There's no and also I know we all get like, oh, we're doing wargaming, but moderns is a bit too near.
Yeah, I found that when we were developing a set of rules for Afghanistan, and it just got to the point where I thought I don't want to do this, and we sort of abandoned that project. Which just it really didn't. It was starting to depress me really. But okay, what do you actually? This is a bit of an off the wall question. Are you a war gamer or are you a figure sculptor? Because I've known quite a lot of people in the hobby who work in the hobby but aren't actually war gamers. Do you war game?
I used to. I just don't have the time to, and I haven't really got war gamers near me.
Right.
So, but I came to wargaming through model making, then sort of got interested in Games Workshop, worked for them for a while, and that's where I found that I was converting figures, and then converting became more of the figure than the original. And I've always painted, so that the making and the painting was always more of an interest than the actual gaming itself. But I was always fascinated by big displays in museums of like models or dioramas. So the big spectacle of a huge war game was very much I was interested in. So that's where, but I can't really. I think when I went to Adepticon in last month was the first time I played a war game in years, really. And that was only like a 1-to-1 combat type thing. You know, I enjoy it and I'll go to shows and things, but my time is taken up sculpting, really.
I mean, it's amazing how much stuff you produce. Prolific is the word, I think. Prolific.
And I know you were at We Have Waste Fest last year, Paul, weren't you? So I know you're a bit of a World War II nut as well.
Yeah.
If you're at a show like that, you know, are you taking photos just because you're interested in the bloke who's, you know, are you taking photos and thinking I can use that when I next design a figure? You are,
yeah. So especially with reenactors or living history, I should say, because that's what their class as it. And We Have Ways. You had the garrison, which were the Royal Artillery.
Oh, the Royal.
They're fantastic. And I know one of the guys there, and you know, you can chat to them and ask what is the proper drill, where would someone be standing, and that's what really interests me, to make sure that the crew's served weapon looks authentic, doesn't look like everyone around the crew that weapon is breakdancing or something, you know, that you get sometimes. So I think having them in the proper firing positions looks so much more dynamic than you know, a 25-pounder crew that look like they've just been shot at. Is, you know, I'd rather replicate it as faithfully as possible. There was also some guys who were doing as airborne reenactors, and speaking to them, they gave me some very good pointers in some of the kit for glider pilots, which I've actually been using for the set of figures I'm sculpting at the moment. So yeah, I would generally, I say to them, you know, do you mind if I take a photo if you're kneeling and from behind, so I can get like the idea of how a piece of cloth would fold to get that right look. Because Osprey books are fantastic, but I wish someone would do like a set of Osprey books that were soldiers from behind, so you get an idea what they look like from behind. Because you get loads from the front, but not many from the reverse. So for me, I mean, for you guys, for people that are painting, it's not an issue. But for me, trying to work out where equipment goes, that's the I'm forever asking if I go to somewhere with living history groups, I'm forever asking, can I take a picture from your backside, please? And we're very fortunate where we live. We have the Chiltern Open Air Museum, which is used a lot for like horrible histories and programs like that, because it's period buildings in a sort of a village setting, and they have lots of living history groups, but they also have people there that will be in the buildings in period costumes. So it's really good for doing like civilians and take photos of those as well.
So you talking, you've piqued Sydney's interest with something there. So Sid, what was you were keen to ask a question there, but I think you might have muted
You're on mute,
yourself.
you dipstick.
Or you've gone over it. You've come over excited.
This is great stuff, Paul. But I was just thinking, if you can't see a living history participant, do you watch videos and films and sort of freeze frame the films? Is that something you'd do as well, or?
Yeah, so for something where there is photographic evidence for, I would have on my computer screen lots of pictures, period pictures, and working with someone like Paul at Empress, he will give me like a list of poses that he kind of wants, and then he'll send me loads of photos that generally would say, can we use this? So I'd like the way this guy looks, especially for the Vietnam range we did, or Paul commissioned me to do, the PBS documentary on Vietnam, where the Battle of Hue, there was so much to mine from just that, the footage from that documentary, and was made each figure sort of slightly individual, which was good.
It's interesting that when we're designing a set of rules, we do a lot of historical research, and you're mirroring that exactly, aren't you?
Well, you got to really.
You have, mate. You have. But I'm not sure everybody does.
What the question in my mind, though, there, Paul, is so the Little Bighorn, the Plains War Kickstarter. Now, there's what they really look like, and there's what Hollywood tells us they look like. How do you know which way you're going to pitch it? Because ultimately, people are going to buy this stuff, and sometimes they want to buy the Hollywood version as opposed to the real version. How do you know which side of that fence you're going to drop in on? Because those figures look great, but you've got the historically accurate in a big beardy. You've got some amazing big. You must have had fun with your little pokey stick making those faces. You've got some amazing looks on those guys. But it doesn't look like the John Wayne films all the time. But there is an element of that in there. So what's the balance?
Well, that would come straight from the commission, which company commissions me. If they said we want to do 7th Cavalry and we want them to look like Hollywood, then that's what we would go for. But again, you can just look up 1870s Americans, even pictures of the guys themselves to get an idea of the moustaches, and those big moustaches really help to give character to a figure, especially when you're doing cavalry. You maybe on pack number 5. You need that individuality in them to make that look so much different from pack number 1. But it is just looking at photos of what people look like at the time, because that's what gives it the range and authenticity. If you do a pose of a figure of like a 19th century figure carrying his weapon in a 21st century way, it automatically, for me, knocks it straight out of the realms of reality. or authenticity. So I try and make sure everything looks as period as possible.
That's amazing. That's a really interesting point. So with all that in vain, I mean, would you ever cast any fantasy figures, figures from, the classic sort of Lord of the Rings or something like that?
Well, we're embarking on that very same, we're doing a project, myself and Andy Hobday. We're creating our own little world building project, which you can look at on Facebook on Hobday and Hicks. We're just doing, from our, was it the third Kickstarter we did for the Barons War, which was the one set in the village. We thought, it'd be nice to be able to do like a range of fantasy that was welded well within sort of a historical context. And that's kind of what we wanted to do. And we've started off doing some orcs and some humans. So yeah, definitely thought about it.
So is that something that people will be able to get their greasy little mitts on soon?
Yes, we're looking to do God knows how many figures I've done already. And that is going to sort of go live as we'll do it as a Kickstarter to start with, because it's the best way for us to be able to produce a lot of figures in one hit, and get the range done and dusted, as opposed to drip feeding. And that will be summer this year. And we're looking to, and that will have its own designated rule book. But the rules will be kind of figure agnostic. And we're making the figures, it's just a nice process, a little bit of freedom for ourselves to sort of experiment.
I have to say that I've been really impressed with your elves, because we've got a set of early medieval dark Midgard, which are coming out, and you look at a lot of elves out there, and they look a bit like they've been on Are You Being Served? That sort of Mr. Humphreys sort of elf look. And I like my elves to be a bit more robust. And your elves look, in my mind, and I found the same with Lord of the Rings, the films as well. They were just a bit too ethereal for me and a bit too flouncy. I like the look of the elves that you've got. They look like they're proper soldiers.
Well, that came from myself and Andy. We kind of did AI sort of way of feeding through, but in a very analog type of way. We both had a phone call. We had a look on the internet of things that we liked the look of, fed them all into a file, and then sent that off to Peter Dennis.
Oh yeah,
Came back with some fantastic concept art, and from there I was like just completely inspired. So we did what a lot of people are doing now with AI, feeding it things, but we just did it in an old school analog way.
I don't know if you heard, actually, talking of AI, last week AI produced a song about Sydney Roundwood. It was called Bonsai Bonkers with Sydney Roundwood, wasn't it, Sid? So it's remarkable. And do you know what was remarkable was every aspect of that song summed him up perfectly. So it's remarkable how you can use AI as a source of good, not just evil. But I saw Peter Dennis had done some fabulous concept art, but I love the idea that rather than just launching into it and just sculpting whatever, you've actually gone to the trouble of going to the premier wargaming artist in the UK and getting him to do that, and that then informs how you're going to go forward. So it's a bit of a process of working together rather than just making it all up on your own.
If you
brilliant.
If I don't have it's like everything, if you don't have a definite idea of what you're going to produce at the end, I will be, if I don't know what a figure would look like towards the end, I'll be you know,
You're clutching
fooling
at
around.
straws a bit, aren't you?
Yeah, for ages. But if I know what a figure will look like at the end,
Yeah.
then it will take half the time to sculpt, and will be a much more enjoyable process.
Yeah.
Because I like the idea of being able to produce a 2D thing into 3 dimensions. That's kind of my buzz.
Okay.
So it kind of opens a door, if we're ready to go there, about the future, because
Mhm.
you know, yours is a craft, genuinely a skill craft that lots of people don't have, and that you are a fine example of the heights of that craft. It's a dying craft though, Paul, isn't it? I mean, fewer people, I guess, are making figures in this way. We're using computer assisted design a lot more.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? All that whole kind of stuff. The 3D bag is out there, of course, and that's that doesn't have some of the challenges of some of the casting process. How do you feel about all that stuff?
Anxious.
Oh, that's a
honest.
really honest answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, anxious in a way that I don't think the wonders of how good social media can be. It doesn't help that if you look at something a couple of times, your feed on social media will be filled with someone else releasing STLs for a range of figures. I
got a lot of stick for I write a column in War Games, Soldiers and Strategy magazine, and I wrote in there that we have to recognize the fact that this was a year or so ago. We have to recognize the fact that 3D printing is potentially a game changer that could really do a lot of damage to the hobby as we know it, in terms of people producing figures. Now, there are some big companies out there who make their money out of producing tanks and soldiers in metal and resin and plastic. And that, if you take that income stream out of those businesses, all they've got left are rule sets. And that's a real potential threat to some very established companies. If we all, and I got a load of flack for mentioning this, a load of flack. People saying, you're wrong, you're wrong. Well, I'm not wrong. It is a real threat, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when I did that panel at Salute last week?
Yeah.
Not last weekend, weekend before.
Yeah.
There was a couple of digital sculptors on there. And there was myself and Mark Copplestone.
Yeah.
And I think people get the idea that, you know, that's digital sculpting is the way it's going to go.
Yeah.
And I came away feeling a bit sort of deflated and a bit anxious. But as I said on the panel, you know, they were asking about the rise of 3D printing. And I was like, but I've never been busier. I've never been busier. But that's not to say I'm not, you know, over the last couple of weeks, I've really thought, what do I need to start the process of maybe doing some of this 3D sculpting. But the thing is, I like to make things with my hands. And I like the idea that what I've made, I've created out of bits in front of me, as opposed to something on a computer screen. I'm not saying, you know, there is some fantastic companies that are producing some great figures out there, but it's just not the way I want to work. It's not. It doesn't appeal to me. Seems too much like work. What I do now, you know, I'd say to people, I'm retired because I get to do what I want to do every day.
Yeah.
Because
you're an artist rather than a technician, which you would become a technician if you were. I don't know. Would that be a bit too harsh? But I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yeah.
What you're doing is.
Well, it's just not the way I would like to work. I mean, that's not to say I might have a go at it and think, oh Christ, why am I mucking around with bits of glue and stuff? But like I said before, I was always fascinated by, you know, those. Thank God they haven't done it, but I can't. I'm going to be really upset when they destroy the flight exhibition in the Science Museum. It's all the models in there of aircraft that have been obviously handmade. They're not kits.
No.
You know, someone has sat there and made them by hand. And I'm always, you know, one of the people I think is a complete magician is Ian Armstrong, because he produces everything out of plastic card or a piece of wood, and he manages to produce, you know, a model just as equally as good as a 3D render. What we are looking at is the ability to be able to take what I do and scan it, and then see if we can then do that as a digital sculpt.
Right.
No, that's interesting, isn't it?
So we would then be able to hit both sides of, you know, the coin then.
Yeah, because I knew quite a few people who did that at the very front end of that. People would sculpt in a traditional manner and then put it through a scanner. But I mean, whether that works, of course, is the $100,000 question or whatever it is. So what? It's uncertain, though, isn't it? I think the future is how it's going to go is quite uncertain. I
think it's like.
I was just going to say,
everything.
Interestingly, you know, we heard about a company this week producing another edition of a set of flagship rules, and people are going, oh, this is they're just ripping us off. And you think, well, hold on a minute, if you're buying all your tanks and figures elsewhere, they're going to look at the one area that people can't 3D print, and that's got to be rule sets. So it's we're in a period of flux. It's, I think, what I'm trying to say.
Well, hopefully the figures I produce, people will be able to. I think you've just got to flex, haven't you? You've got to pivot. We had these same. I could hear these same conversations when the Perrys released their first box of plastics.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of people said, this is going to kill my. You know, this has destroyed a market. But then I said to a couple of people, this allows you to make the things that, if you want to do a range of Napoleonics, you don't have to make everything now. You don't have to embark along. If you want to just make some French pontooniers, you can do, because someone's already produced everything else in plastic. Bless you.
One of the things as well is that what you produce is figures which turn into metal, and we've sort of talked about this a little bit on the Oddcast. I mean, we do a lot of participation games up and down the country, this country, other countries, and having metal figures is a real advantage there. So yeah, you can have a CAD design sculpt or a plastic figure, but they're never going to be quite as robust as a well-designed, well-made metal figure, you know, when painted, and also when being used by people around the table who, you know, you haven't gamed with before, and, you know, there may be many different shades of how they treat your figures.
Oh, here we go. Sausage fingers again, eh? Right.
But with a metal figure, it's really robust, and your figures have certainly, in the games that we've played, stood the test of time. And I think the points you make about the craftsmanship that you obviously sort of add into the figures, Paul, you know, that's reflected by a lot of us who, you know, whether it's a retro sort of feeling for a metal figure, or we've always done it that way, you know, there is something which is nice about a metal figure which is created by someone, and we can recognize that person's sculpts. And your sculpts are always, you know, really anatomically correct, they're always very distinctive, and it's nice to sort of enjoy a sculpt that we recognize, as opposed to one, you know, basically which is being produced by a CAD design program.
Thank you. Well, I think I luckily sneaked in before the door closed on, you know, sort of traditional miniature sculpting. So I'm very, you know, feel very privileged to that. But what I did find is when we went to Adepticon, there was, you know, I was working, well, not working, I was been kindly hosted a little bit by Badger Games, run by a great guy, Ben, in Milwaukee. And he's all of his stuff was metal figures, pretty much predominantly hand sculpted, and people, especially like he has Bad Squiddo stuff there, and the stuff was flying out.
Yeah.
And I was doing a bit of sculpting while I was there, and a guy, you know, a lot of people were coming up and saying, you know, that they appreciate hand sculpted figures, but they also appreciate 3D, you know, digital sculpting figures. There didn't seem to be a no, you can only do this or you can only do that. They were open to everything, you know. There was no, if they liked something in one medium, then they would buy it, as opposed to buy it, you know. It wasn't, oh, I'm not going to touch that. I think that's just hope. Well, I can see that being, you know, a positive outcomes to this situation, that, you know, people will buy what they want to buy.
I'm really encouraged, you know, when you say that you've had you've never had it so good, if you like, at the moment. You've never been so busy. I mean, the ranges you produce always get great feedback. People want that authenticity, I think, that comes with those figures created in that way. I mean, I've got 3D printed stuff coming out of my ears, and, you know, I've not got my own printer, but for materials and objects and terrain type stuff, brilliant. The figures still don't have the robustness. They still don't quite have that kind of Tamiya philosophy. Maybe they don't quite have that moment of capturing the essence of what the figures go. I mean, I was at the Louvre at the weekend in Paris, and I was looking at the Venus de Milo, and in fact, I tweeted about it. You know, it looks like a Paul Hicks sculpt. Right, and people were gathering around and queuing up to see it, and so these things are kind of etched in the mind. And Montmartre, where the artists are creating stuff, you know, from in authentic ways, there's a certain fascination and appeal that will always be there. I think it's you know, I think it is a craftsman's space, and I think the risk is, of course, if you turn it out, if you then say, Paul, well, actually, I'm going to be, you know, CAD design, you kind of lose the craftsman's thing, and it becomes a kind of mass-produced product, which again is kind of different and not quite perhaps you know, where you'd want to be. I don't know, but the future is going to be different, isn't it? Interesting, really fascinating.
Well, I fancy having a go just to see if what I produce physically will then translate to what I produce. If, you know, I could, we'll have to wait and see if that's something that happens. I mean, the problem is I'm a complete technical Luddite, so.
Well, we saw just trying to get you on the Zoom call, you know. I think.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
How many Paul Hickses could join? Could there be? We had 2 or 3 at one point.
Well, I was answering the landline at one stage, talking through that.
Press button B. Okay, so that's interesting, but Sydney, I think now we've had all that now we've sucked all that information out of your brain. Before we toss you aside and discard you onto the scrap heap of wargaming life, I think Sydney's got a bit of a question for you, haven't you, Sydney?
We have indeed, because as with all of our guests on the show, we do like to introduce you to our Oddcast game, which is the defenestration of lard.
Ooh.
That's exactly how I feel about it.
At that point, we've got to pause because I can't remember how to play it.
Yeah, I don't. What do we do?
Because there'll be a jingle after I say,
right.
How do we play this?
Before we go any further, let's play the jingle for the defenestration of lard.
The defenestration of lard.
So the defenestration of lard, Paul, is our little game here on the Oddcast. So out of the many evils in the world, we ask our guests, and we're going to ask you to name the one thing that you'd like to hurl out of our window here at Lard Island and dash it onto the rocks below. So one thing only in the world of miniature wargaming or miniature historical figure manufacturing or buying and selling or whatever. What one thing is in your mind that you want to get rid of forever?
Well, it's not a physical thing. It's more, it's negativity.
Whoa, nice.
Especially, I think over the times I've been at UK shows, just a sense of negativity. I think, well, my eyes were. Pardon?
How does that show up then? How does that show up?
Just like, I couldn't use those figures. They're not the right scale, or, you know, just a level of underlying negativity that you kind of come across, which we didn't come across when we went. I'll say it again, when we went to Adepticon. Everyone seemed so positive, and you know, it's kind of, it's something I've never come across, is being thanked for, you know, people have said, you know, thanks for the figures that you've done, but like, generally happy to see you.
So one of the ways I think it might show up is, and I've heard this being said, you know, not necessarily about your ranges, but about others, where somebody will release a new range and the first thing they tell is what it's not got in it.
Yeah, that again is a massive part of it. Oh, well, when are you going to do this? Well, hang on.
Yeah. Thanks for the 491 figures you've given us. When are you going to give us one more that's the one that I want?
And the strange thing is when we've done Kickstarters, the floods of positivity that come through people's comments, you know, like, when we produce something for a Kickstarter, and people seem to generally be happy. If we did that, I think if a company just went, right, I've just released 20 packs of figures onto the market, the amount of negativity that would come out would be, you know, oh, you know, why have they done that? Or why have you done this? You know, it's...
And yeah, Kickstarter seems to harness a bit of energy, doesn't it? It seems to get people, I don't know, it's the promise of great things to come, I guess. We all like the idea of that. Whereas, as you say, I think if you were to release a pack of figures this week and another one next month and another one the month after, nobody would even notice it, would they?
No, I mean, we do. I mean, we have come across, again, negativity. Oh, you're doing Kickstarter again, you know. Oh, why aren't these on general release? But this allows us to be able to produce what we need to produce for you guys to have a cohesive range. Otherwise, if you did it, you'd take ages to recoup the outlay, let alone, you know, some bits and pieces for yourself to actually live on. I think that's again what a lot of people are not aware of, how expensive it is to produce figures. Because it is expensive, and you know, gone are the days where it's pence to produce, you know, a metal casting. You know, it's, I think a lot of people are backwards looking, and I think you know, the Kickstarters are definitely a way of producing a bit more positivity, and people give you honest feedback as well, and positive, you know, positive criticism, but in a positive way, you know.
Okay, well, I don't think we're going to have to vote on this, because it strikes me that negativity is never something that we're going to vote for as being a positive thing. So I think you've kind of blindsided us there, mate, with that very clever answer.
It's a very, very clever answer, isn't it? Yeah, for all the reasons you say, Rick.
I thought you were going to say fat people, and we'd have to throw Nick out the window. In fact, I did hint at that as a possible suggestion when I emailed about it earlier. But apparently,
No,
Nick,
couldn't
you're
do that.
safe. You're safe.
Well,
and
yeah,
we're going to
but
throw
Paul's very wise.
negativity out instead.
I've seen
Well-
his demographic. There are a number of fat people that buy his product. He'd be very unwise to throw fat people. In fact, he'd be very unwise to try and squeeze fat people through the window onto the defenestration. just imagine the mess at the bottom as well.
Yeah.
Although, actually, I guess while that fat person was bent over, squeezing out the window, Paul might like to take a photo so he can then sculpt it even more accurately
right.
at the end.
The Osprey Fat People from Behind book is Paul.
That's
bane of my life.
The next
Bane
one
of my
in the
life.
range, that would be. So negativity, I think. Well, we can't if we don't throw negativity out of the window, we've got to defenestrate Paul Hicks. And I'm not going to be the person who's responsible for doing that. So I've got to vote for negativity. For me, goes out the window.
Yeah. It would have been quite fun to hurl him out the window, but yeah, on balance, I mean, I do love it. I mean, we threw old Scottish Colin from Devon out the window, didn't we? And
yeah, still see the marks, still see the skid marks on the way down.
But yeah, so you've survived, Paul. Congratulations! I'm sure.
Thank you very so much.
Pleased to know that you've survived. And we are going to defenestrate negativity in all its evilness at the end of this show.
Although we do think that the casting a figure that a fat person be defenestrated could be a real killer range for you there, mate.
Could be.
Well, that's it. I'll keep that logged.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a
Great
pleasure
stuff.
talking to you.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been great to chat to you, Paul. It's really good catching up. And I know that everyone will love to hear the recording that you've just given us. Nick.
Will you be at We Have Ways Fest again this year?
Yes. Yeah, I'm sharing a tent with Ali, so we're glamping. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if there's a window in that tent, then you can get defenestrating.
Well, you'll get plenty of pictures of fat people from behind in that arrangement, won't you? So
yeah, if I want them or not.
Yeah.
Well, we will be there, of course. We're going to be at We Have Ways Fest as well. We've just trying to arrange what in detail that looks like, but we'll be back.
Brilliant.
I'm an American.
Richard won't be there. He would defenestrate him by then.
I look forward to it. But I'll be at Historicon, but which I'm looking forward to. But funny, two like buses, the two events have come along all at once, and you can only get on one off there. But yeah, brilliant.
Oh, can I throw one more question at Paul?
No,
a question that I personally want to know. I mean, Paul, would you ever sculpt in any other scale?
Yeah, I think the problem is it's learning to do it again.
Yeah.
In a different scale. So the thing is, I'm terrible at horses. So I generally go to other people to do that. Not just because it will take me ages to practice doing horses to get to the horse that I think would be acceptable to be sold. So to do something in a different scale, I've done the odd 15mm figure, and I did what I thought was a 20mm figure. I was going by a detailed armature, and then when I put it up against another 20mm figure I wanted to use in a diorama, it was too big, and I ended up selling it on.
25 is the golden zone, isn't it? 28, 25, 28.
Yeah. So I would like to do it, but it would. So my original passion was, large 54mm sort of figures, historical figures. I would like to have a go at doing that, but again, I need someone to pay me, or to have something that in the background. Hopefully, that's what happened with the fantasy stuff, that will allow me a little bit of time to be able to experiment on and other things without fearing and losing income for the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're learning.
That
You're
makes sense.
effectively learning a new skill, aren't you?
Yes, yeah. It's completely different. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, there's your bonus question, Nicholas. Any
Yeah, I
more
want
to-
for any more before we let him go?
No,
That will cost you.
no.
Yeah. If I were you, I'd get away quick because we might reverse our voting and chuck you out the window. Yeah.
Brilliant
Cool.
stuff, Paul. Really good to
Thank
catch
you very
up.
much. Yeah, no
Thank you.
problem.
Right.
Right.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks.
Am I allowed to leave now?
Mate. Cheers. Thank you. You can go now. You're a free man.
Cheers,
Excellent.
mate.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sydney Roundward. He's got red trousers.
Well, that was fantastic. Seeing Paul throw negativity out of the window of the wargaming hobby is one of the highlights of this year so far, I think. But we've progressed towards the end of the show. Chaps, was there anything else to add, or have we done?
I think we've done it. It's
Very
been
interesting.
it's been a long one, as they say, Sydney.
It's been a good one.
Excellent.
It's been interesting to catch up with Paul. He's somebody that I've wanted to talk to about that process for so long, because I just take it for granted that this piece of magic arrives through the post. And, you know, I kind of hear bits and pieces about how it gets there, but I wanted just to hear from the maestro about how that process worked. Really interesting that he's got little bits and pieces, and that sometimes it's done, you know, from scratch, and sometimes it's built from a bit of a kind of Frankenstein's process. But yeah, loved it. Really good to talk to him, and nice bloke too.
Yeah, lovely
Excellent.
guy. Lovely guy.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's probably all we've got time for tonight. We'll save the announcements of what's coming up in the future to the next Oddcast. But it remains to thank both of you, in addition to Paul, Richard and Nick. Thank you very much for being my guests on this edition of the Oddcast. And we will, in traditional fashion, have Roger Barraclough and the band playing us out. So to everyone out there, good evening and good night.
Good night.
In tonight's show, Sydney Roundward is joined by Nicholas Skinner and Richard Clark. Music by Roger Barraclough and his band.